Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. So, one of the most famous phrases in Brexit is cherry picking. The EU frequently had to make clear to Theresa May and Boris Johnson alike there would be no cherry picking in terms of what they got from the EU and what they sort of gave up. The term made a comeback in the past year as Keir Starmer's Labour pushed for a much closer relationship, but with the unwelcome baggage of a load of red lines. But EU officials now say the term is being retired as it's not very helpful. So what did cherry picking really mean? And why is the term being dropped now that we're entering a new period of cooperation and friendship? But first, for daily news and commentary, please hit the subscribe button to stay notified. So I suspect the reason EU officials are dropping their use of the term cherry picking in relation to what is and isn't feasible in terms of their post-Brexit relationship with the UK is down to a couple of factors. The first, I think, is a lot of people didn't really agree on what the term meant. The second is because the circumstances have actually changed. So the meaning, first of all, because a lot of British-based anti-Brexit commentators would describe Labour's aims for a closer EU relationship as cherry-picking. And yet, although some details still have to be worked out, it looks like the EU are agreeing to give Starmer what he's been asking for. And it's not like the EU suddenly lost all their cards. So that must mean that what Labour were trying to negotiate can't have been cherry-picking. Now, my understanding of the term, cherry picking, was in line with how it's reported in an article, I'll just link in the description below, that it meant we could not negotiate benefits without accepting the responsibilities tied to those benefits. So, for example, Boris Johnson would have absolutely loved to carry on trading with the EU without the need for all that bothersome Brexit paperwork. Oh, brilliant. The EU would be delighted with that as well. So you will maintain dynamic alignment with EU standards and, oh, no, we're not going to do that. So he wanted free trade, but he wouldn't accept alignment of standards. Well, that doesn't work. Now the Tories, they don't care about standards. So they saw no downside. They didn't actually see the problem with that, because they don't care about illegal imports. As far as they're concerned, there'd be no such thing as illegal imports because they'll just get rid of all standards in the country. No problem at all. As far as they're concerned, they're rich enough to know exactly where their food comes from, so they know it's safe, and sod the rest. Let the market decide. That's their motto. But the EU are a high standards market, and they were determined to maintain those standards, of course. If the UK wanted access to the single market, it would accept the rules of the single market, as well as, of course, pay a fee for it, like every other non-EU country with access. The oft-used analogy was the Tories stopping payment of their gym membership, refusing to follow the rules, but being outraged that they were no longer allowed to use the exercise bikes. But some people in the UK, not sure about the EU, seem to think it just meant having anything other than an in or out approach to the single market. But lots of countries around the world have trade deals with the EU without free access to the single market. So a misunderstanding of what the term meant seemed to lead to a misunderstanding of what was possible, at least in the British debates. But the second reason was probably wariness of what Brexit might lead to. A hard Brexit was always going to be bad for the UK, but the EU were determined that the contagion did not spread. Brexit commentators in the UK would complain that the EU were being spiteful in terms of their own lead lines. We would often jeer back, but I thought you said we had all the cards. But also, why should we have expected special treatment from the EU? They were exercising their sovereign rights to protect their own market with any legal means they saw fit. There was, of course, a fear that if the UK somehow appeared to get a soft enough Brexit that we avoided serious consequences without having to accept much in the way of responsibilities, other countries might wonder why they were having to follow rules that the UK didn't. That would have led to the Daily Expresser's favourite dream, the fragmentation of the EU, which would, of course, then collapse the benefits of the single market for everyone. Back to being bit players with the USA and China picking us off. But because the UK government made such a pig's ear of the whole thing, you can hardly find any anti-EU leaders in Europe now thinking their country should leave. The equivalent of Brexiteers in other countries like France, Italy, Greece, Germany and so on. None of them think we should leave the EU after voters around the bloc saw what happens when you try it. It's like the anti-Kennedy effect. For people of a certain age, much older than I am, it was often said that they could all remember where they were when they heard Kennedy was shot. Nobody in Europe remembers saying they should leave the EU anymore, because who would do something that stupid? So given that the UK clearly never posed a threat to EU unity, at least as far as commitment to the single market goes, We can be open to some agreements that might have been considered very risky at the time. The situation has basically just calmed down now. In Britain, most people recognise that Brexit didn't deliver on the promises, and so obviously we have to do something different. In the EU, the fear that Brexit would lead to further instability seems to have evaporated some time ago. So the UK and EU are free to approach discussions in the same way each would with any other market around the world. Give and take to the mutual benefit of both sides. So there's no longer any need for anyone to warn against cherry picking. So we never need hear the expression again. But there we are. Those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe for further content. If you'd like to support the channel further, you can click the join button for memberships. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.